Today's news is absolutely massive. We are literally watching the bubble burst in real time, and I know that this is going to be a bit offensive to some, but I actually think this is a good thing. It's important, it needs to happen, because what was going on was unsustainable. The news is this: PlayStation just axed even more in-development live service titles, but those are the facts. There's also a human angle. This man is Shuhei Yoshida, right? Now, he used to be the boss of PlayStation Worldwide Studios. He was running the whole shebang. Now, he recently left the company, he's giving interviews, and this snippet with kinda funny games is rather revealing.
I hope, this strategy would work in the end. If I was in the position of the Harman, probably I would try to resist that direction. Maybe that's one of the reasons they removed me from the first study.
She was going to be a problem. She was going to be a problem for a live service, but she won't want to do it. Get him out. Move it over there.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a funny way to set the tone, and to be clear, it's not like he was burning bridges. He was complimentary of other people. That quote was part joke, given the absurd success of Helldivers 2. But still, that's not all that he would say in the interview. And 24 hours after the interview aired, Bloomberg broke the story of 2 dead games. One game from Days Gone creator Bend Studios is dead, another one from Demon Souls remake studio Bluepoint, and actually just after that, it seems yet another game may be dead. And at least for those 2 studios, that's a console generation worth of work dead. And what we'll see today is how PlayStation's completely unfounded confidence in their skills was their undoing. And that's something you can avoid with today's sponsor. For the absolute best of what they do, they're boot.dev, and here's the deal with them, right? They'll teach you back-end web development using Python and Go, but more importantly, they're just a cut above the rest, and they're designed for you and me by people like us, because the founders are also gamers. They're actually viewers of our channels, that's why they hit us up. But basically, boot.dev is also a community RPG. And for something real neat, just take a look at this, which is the real-time leaderboard of other people doing lessons. They've got quests, XP, community boss battles, and all of that supporting an extremely thorough, detailed, and career-focused learning pathway that will take you right from the basics of learning Python through to full-on back-end development, and you'll be doing really fun side quests, things like remaking asteroids in Pygame, and you'll get vital job-adjacent skills, things like mastering Git that are extremely important. And of course, if you want to be a back-end dev, well, good choice. That's a really good career path. You're earning an average of 100 grand, great contracts, often flexible working, and of course, everything you'll learn here is proper-ass programming, transferable skills. And the deal with Boot is they just do it better than anyone else. So you can check them out at boot.dev/Bellular News. There, you get 25% off your first purchase. I'd usually go annual for the biggest saving because, well, if it's not for you, that's okay. They've got a no questions asked 30-day refund, and you can even browse their site, their materials, their demos, all that stuff for free. Alright, to start, let's survey the damage. So Bluepoint and Bend were both studios known for mostly their single-player game projects. So Bend's last game was Days Gone, and it didn't sell incredibly well, as you'd expect from a PlayStation blockbuster, but it did sell similarly to Bloodborne, which really isn't that bad. Not exceptional, not terrible, but it was not enough to warrant a sequel. Now, they did have some multiplayer experience, but that was from Siphon Filter, if you remember that franchise, and Resistance back on the PSP and the Vita, so that didn't really count for much. So given all that, it's hardly a surprise their next project would basically be an executive-friendly trend. Okay, our next studio then is Bluepoint, and you would imagine that the people who remade Demon Souls could easily pick up Bloodborne. And, in a post-Elden Ring world could release that to absolutely gargantuan sales. But no, that was a free win that obviously paled in comparison to what Sony really wanted. So after shipping Demon Souls, they assisted Santa Monica on God of War Ragnarok. They were acquired by Sony in 2021. Now, we had reports that were claiming they were working on an original fantasy project after 2022, but according to Bloomberg, from that point on, what they were actually doing was working on a God of War live service title. Fantastic. It's kind of odd with God of War, by the way, because rumors suggested an Atreus-based DLC. That didn't happen, and what we instead got was a roguelite mode, so maybe there's some kind of link there. Anyway, that's the dead project. But as for the fallout, we have no idea on layoffs, but Sony have said that they're keeping those studios open. At least that's a good thing. But what makes this story worse is the bit that you may not know, and that is the sheer scale of Sony's live service graveyard. get ready for this, because this is honestly completely mad. They say a picture speaks 1,000 words. I think this one absolutely does. It's bloody depressing, right? So what we can see here is PS5 investment, and it doubled from fiscal year 2019 to 25. But, well, as far as like a percentage of investment, live service titles grow from only 12% to 60%. And if you take a look at the bit of each bar that is traditional game investment, it goes down, which, well, I think we noticed, and it has came up again, but it's only flat with where it was previously. But here's the thing. Years passed, inflation happened, so that investment being flat, assuming this is not inflation adjusted, means that it's actually less investment in traditional games. So $100 in 2019 would be worth $123 today. That's almost a quarter. So basically, in like relative terms, traditional game investment went down and it is still down. Now, as a public story, this whole live service delusion began in 2022 with the announcement of a plan that I'm pretty sure Sony really regrets. Investors learned that 12 live service games would be up and running by the end of fiscal year 2025, which is April 2026. That's pretty close. So far, based on Sony's financial reports, we've gotten 4 of them. So there's MLB The Show, which, yeah, by the way, that's a PlayStation thing. There's that, there's Destiny, Helldivers 2, and of course, Concord. Now, all this stuff happened under the leadership of Jim Ryan, but in 2023, he resigned. Just before it all went tits up. And when he did resign, the interim CEO, who is also a wider Sony executive called Hiroki Totoki, he pushed those plans back. There were still going to be 12 titles, but only 6 would be targeting fiscal year 25. And, well, somehow I don't think we're going to be getting a whole bunch more live service games from them by, like, next year. And to understand why, here's the graveyard. So first, there's Deviation Games. They were formed by an ex-Treyarch head, Jason Blundell. Now, allegedly, they were working on a Call of Duty competitor, which, of course, was interesting given the Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft. But I said working because soon they shut down. But oddly enough, Sony then founded a new internal studio, also with Jason, that right now is hiring for what their job site calls a groundbreaking AAA game. I'm sure it will be. And they're doing so in LA, so that's going to be extremely expensive, but I think there is a reason there, thinking as well that he's from Treyarch, and that people presume it'll be a COD competitor, or specifically a zombies competitor. Because of that, California does make sense. There are loads of FPS studios there. But anyway, back to the graveyard. So next in the chopping block, we've got London Studio. Their studio and their modern fantasy co-op game were shut down, so there was that. And to that, of course, we add this report's dead games. There's the God of War live service game, and then there's another live service game that was from Bend. But of course, that's not all. There's another dead game, perhaps. Basically, shortly after the report from Bloomberg, we learned that NCSoft, who PlayStation has got, of course, the Horizon MMORPG with, well, they're actually cutting projects, so the Horizon MMO might also go. Which would be pretty rough for Sony, given that, you know, they've got the Horizon transmedia narrative stuff, and, well, the more Horizon games that people can buy, the better, so if the MMO goes, I'm sure they'll be kind of pissed. Anyway, there are, of course, many other dead games. Spider-Man co-op game from Insomniac. There was going to be one, now there's not. There was also a Last of Us extraction game from Naughty Dog, which they very publicly killed, and then a Twisted Metal project from Firesprite, though apparently it was in the earlier stages. And just getting real with you for a second, holy shit, the amount of money that they have lost in all this is absurd. So they're down like a cool $200 million in Concord. That's certainly going to sting, but that must pale in comparison to all of the money spent on all of these projects from all of these teams, and of course the money that they've spent on projects that are currently not dead but are still in development and presumably will be pretty expensive, with, you know, not the best track record for success. So here are the games that we know of. There's a Horizon multiplayer game from Guerrilla, there's Fair Games from Haven, Marathon from Bungie, there's Something, I suppose, from Jason Blundell's studio, and then there's Gummy Bears. So Gummy Bears, I know, bit of a weird thing, but that's an incubation project from Bungie that Sony just handed off to a new development team. And overall, like big picture, there is no way to see this other than a massive failure. And at the time that they made these grand plans, Sony did acknowledge the risk, but it's pretty damn clear that they did not grasp, well, just how deluded they were, because they were deluded, so obviously they wouldn't. Now that is my opinion, but I think that this evidence does help to back it up. Now that we've had our fun dander through the graveyard, let's return to the Shuhei Yoshida interview. But before I play a clip, I need you to note this, right? So, big live projects tied to single-player games from single-player studios have not had a successful win rate so far for Sony. And I want you to keep another thing in mind, and that is opportunity cost. Great example is Bluepoint's time going into live service instead of, say, a Bloodborne remake that we would have all purchased. Okay, here's the clip.
What they did after I moved on and Herman took over is company and Sony gave a lot more resources. I don't think they said to Herman that stop making these single player games. They said, oh yeah, these games are great, just continue doing it, and we give you additional resource to work on these, service games and try it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure they knew it's risky. It's not the chance of a game successful in this hugely competitive genre would be small. However, company knowing that risk gave Herman resource and chance and try it. I think that's the way they did it. So in my mind, oh wow, that's great. And hopefully, some games will become successful. And luckily, Helldiver 2 did so well.
It sure did.
No one have expected, right?
Our takeaway from that's fairly interesting. Yes, start making live service games. But with that, there's a problem here. Sony's experience lay in single-player games, especially with their key studios. Now, Sony somewhat understood that was a problem. That's actually one of the reasons why they bought Bungie, because yes, having Destiny is nice, but the real asset for them was live game experience. That was strategically important because, you saw the graph of spend and the plan for 12 games. And remember that when that went down, it was in the Witch Queen days when Destiny was top of the world and Bungie seemed so strong. I mean, hell, even taking a look at Firewalk, the Concord team, that's largely ex-Bungie people. So you can see that they believed in that experience. And listening to that clip, the other thing we can do is revisit the numbers from the investment chart. And we clearly see that live service games outgrew traditional, especially adjusted for inflation, and perhaps even more so because live service was the company's focus. And that doesn't just eat up big primary development teams, it also eats up outsourcing, support teams, that kind of thing. Sony did not have the expertise nor the bandwidth to do this, so it's no surprise that almost all of the recently cancelled games are from teams with single-player histories that they can actually fall back on and have decent sales. I mean, hell, Naughty Dog pretty much threw live service under the bus when they were announcing the cancellation of their project. And all of this, to me, seems like what happens whenever managerial midwits are the people calling the shots, right? These are amazingly investable plans on paper. They're made by people and sold to people who are stuck in a blinkered strategic mindset, but who, because of that, are unable to see how their plans do not make sense on the operational and the tactical level. Point is, tactical feeds into operational, operational feeds into strategic, and if any part of that chain is broken, congratulations, you will fail your strategic goals, which they did. Now, let me put this into terms that will make your blood boil. So, a Bloodborne remake from Bluepoint, finally at 60 FPS to maybe 120 FPS on a PS5 Pro, also releasing on the PC. Perhaps some new intellectual property from Bend, significantly more progress from Naughty Dog in their project, maybe a narrative DLC for The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, the original Last of Us Is Left Behind expansion was absolutely incredible. Would be nice to have one of those. For God of War, maybe it's the Atreus DLC. And maybe we would have had something from Firesprite. The point basically is those would all be dependable projects that would bolster the PlayStation lineup, the sorts of things they literally used to do before. And big picture, that's hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars that would not have been burnt to a crisp to do live service. And if that money had not been burnt to a crisp, maybe it would have prevented the waves of layoffs that were seen across Sony-owned studios. Even their winners like Insomniac, who per the leaks, actually felt that the job cuts would materially hurt their output. Let's bring this home because PlayStation did respond to Bloomberg. PlayStation told Bloomberg that they've still got online and single-player games on the go, and of course, we already know about Fair Games, Marathon, Gummy Bears, and the Horizon project. And there is a bit of a key difference here, right? Because looking at those games, the thing you notice is that 3 out of 4 of those are being made from live game-focused studios. There is then Guerrilla, who don't really make live games, but at least they'll have some institutional multiplayer experience. And with that, I think we can learn that Herman Hulst, who's currently CEO, might have finally remembered to take his own advice. If he had of, and perhaps had more power in the past, then, things would have played out differently. Here's what he said. There's no risk that we're not going to be aligned on what the team is good at, what the team wants to make, and what we expect from the team. So I guess that was basically just a lie. They were thrown into the live service mines rather than doing, the obvious Bloodborne remake, something that would have made sense. And funnily enough on that, Yoshida's own theory is that Bloodborne is like Miyazaki's personal project and he'd really want to work on it himself. Which I do kind of get, but would Sony need permission for a remake? I mean, Sony owns Bloodborne, not FromSoft. So, in a sense, right? The takeaway from today is that nature is healing. Less labor is being poorly allocated into projects that basically seem to be doomed. That should mean that, relatively speaking, better games, better use of time and industry resources. But obviously, that's going to seem harsh. It's not going to be of comfort to the hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people whose professional output has been thrown into the bin. That will feel grim. But it's also not over. So budget leaks have happened for Activision, and they revealed the true scale of some of the AAA game budgets. That's right as we're looking into one studio who's trying to do AAA single-player games right. It is the perfect companion to this video, so watch it next.